to the Exitology Unlock Your Profits, Unlock Your Potential show on the #1 global business talking news network on the internet, IBGR, International Business Growth Radio. Before we get started in this next session with our negotiation expert, Christine McKay, I want to mention that if you go to exitology.com and click on Contact Us and send us a question about anything business related under the sun, that we will answer it in an upcoming episode. So please go and do that, especially because you're about to have your brain expanded by Christine. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us here today.
Thank you again.
You're welcome. So we talked a few minutes ago about how do we increase and protect value with smart negotiation? What is negotiation? Who needs it? All those types of things. We talked about the most important thing about seeking to understand first. And so in that spirit, I want to understand how negotiation can be applied to different business growth cycles because, you know, you might be plateaued out, or you might be in a high growth phase, or you might be going into the dip, or even, you know, a turnaround phase. There's a lot that can change rapidly in business, as we all know. And so maybe, you know, why don't you walk us through how you think about that, where you see negotiation applying to different cycles, and, you know, what are you seeing out there?
So when a company is in early stages, to be honest, there's not a lot that they're going to often be able to negotiate. Sometimes there is. It depends on the market, depends on the business that they're in.
Okay.
I know some startups who are doing some, you know, and I actually have a client that is building a robotics business, and he's selling to large institutions. And so, but he has a background in that space. So that's
Okay.
part of how he's doing that. That's not always the case for everybody. And so when you're in your ability to negotiate with a big player, especially when you're really new and you don't have a track record, is somewhat constrained. So you have to be very specific about the things that are, and to our word earlier, clarity. You have to be very, very clear on what your most important elements are of your relationships, because you should be searching for those in your sales process so that you're not dealing with bad deals for you on the back end.
So negotiation in the startup world, because you're so focused on probably getting MVP and getting traction and getting the machine running, you don't necessarily, and also because of the type of negotiation you do, you don't see a lot of Venn style negotiation happening there. But then what happens as you get all of those things going and you move into this rapid growth phase?
Then what happens is those agreements that you signed or you clicked through or you just accepted, right? Which happens all the time. We all do it. They quit serving you as much. And because now you're starting to grow, and suppliers that you used before may not be the right suppliers for you in a high growth market. Customers actually, as you move up market and you decide you want to move more into serving enterprise or larger accounts, your smaller customers may not be the right customer fit for you anymore. And so you have to pay attention to that as you grow, and you want to make sure that you've built in a mechanism in your negotiations that allows you to renegotiate those relationships, either for improved, you know, deliveries, improved pricing, whatever the things are that you need to improve.
So I love this word that keeps coming up, and I'm sure it's going to keep coming up throughout our discussion today: clarity. Because I mean, I know even from how we've grown Exitology that part of the negotiation with legacy clients has had to be essentially, hey, you know, 5 years ago when we started working together, this is X, Y, and Z, what we all agreed to. You come to them with clarity. Okay, this is where we're going over the next 5 years. And with Exitology, of course, our whole focus is on growing businesses, creating transferable value, building enterprise value, and all those things, which obviously we're going to talk about with you. But my point being, that might not have been how somebody got involved with us 5 years ago. And so there is a moment where you have to say, look, because of these reasons over here, we're moving in this direction. What does that mean for you? And would you like to come along? And do you see, is that usually, and I'm using ourselves as a case study, but I'm using that to demonstrate, is that kind of the gist of where you see these places going from more of a startup into having negotiating with the clients, and then, sometimes eventually having to shed those clients or move them somewhere else? And, how's that all work in your world?
Well, there are a few different elements in that space for that company in that kind of high growth area. One is, yes, there are times when your client base from when you were just starting is not the right client base, and you need to unwind those relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the best negotiation outcome is that you walk away amicably, right?
Yeah.
That not everybody will continue to forever be your ideal client.
Right.
And, and so that's something you need to be prepared for. And a lot of companies are very reluctant to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But what ends up happening when they don't do that is that those smaller customers tend to become a big drain on the business. They demand a lot. They're used to a different level of attention. There's just all sorts of elements around them that can become difficult and drain the business. The other challenge that really starts to show, and that I see a lot, is that the CEO and the founder is the one continuing to do the negotiation.
Oh.
And that's a huge risk for the company, because as the CEO and founder, they tend to be much more emotionally ingrained in the outcome. And so they're so in the business that they also can't see, the forest for the trees, so to speak. Right. And so they don't recognize because there's also a control element and an ego element a lot of times. They don't recognize the importance of having somebody insinuated into that process, so that then they have an escalation path. Instead, they're sitting at the negotiation table. There is no escalation path, and whoever you're negotiating with almost certainly has an escalation path, but they expect you to make all the decisions in the moment right now. You lose the benefit of saying, hey, I have to think about that. I have to run that up the flagpole, so to speak.
Looking at it from that lens, we see that a lot with the types of businesses that we work with, where they're founder led, and because the founder has sort of by default become the negotiation expert, not necessarily by any conscious decision, just found themselves sitting in that seat, that they then are negotiating, poorly thought out or just not thought out deals, reactive deals, and lots of value gets left on the table. So I think what you're saying here is it's important to start looking at who that advisory bench around you is sooner rather than later, but also, if nothing else, know that one of your blind spots is very likely negotiation.
And, a lot of companies will say to me, well, I have a lawyer. And I'm like, yeah, but the challenges with your attorneys, most of them, who are also not really well trained as negotiators. They take a class in law school, it's a semester long class, and then they just go do it. But we could get into a whole conversation about how negotiation training is not effective, and it's proven over and over again. But it doesn't matter if you're a lawyer. It doesn't matter if you're a business person. It doesn't matter. Just because you're doing the negotiation and because you signed some deals doesn't mean you're good at it, right? It just doesn't mean you're good at it. How do you know, what are you using as your metric to determine whether or not you're good at it or not? And one of the things is that when a company is growing and you're starting to move up this cycle, up this the curve in terms of the type of customers you're servicing, your sales team, if they're used to selling to small businesses, that is not the sales team to sell to an enterprise Fortune 1000 company. Right. And there's a whole process, like there's a 100-page operating manual that becomes embedded into the contract with those kind of companies.
Mm-hmm.
How, what are you doing to negotiate that? And most businesses don't think about those things. They think that the same person who negotiated with the $1 million company is qualified to negotiate with the billion-dollar company. And there are different elements in most businesses, not all, but
Yeah.
there are different elements. So,
Well, and I, not to throw a wrench into anybody's thinking out there that's listening to this, but the other negotiation that you're having is not just, it's an internal negotiation. Hey, you were the salesperson who got me $2 million. Well, we're a $10 million a year company now because we're selling to totally different, right? So then, right, does that mean you're going to grow with us? Because that's going to require this new set of input, requirements, or has our time passed and now we need to let you go or whatever. So there's actually, negotiation at the highest leadership levels is going in all directions is the point I'm trying to make.
yeah. And I mean, the thing is, even your procurement people are not always great negotiators. They're great process people. They're great at getting product from point A to point B to point C, making sure that you don't have, failure rates that are high in the field when a product hits the field, et cetera. But that doesn't mean they're a good negotiator. Like really effective negotiators have this interesting blend of really loving and understanding the power of words, the psychology of the people, of themselves. They're huge students of themselves as well as other people, and they understand the math, right? And that's a hard combination to find, right?
Yeah.
Somebody who's really good at all three of that and can call BS when they see BS, right? If you get somebody who's super process oriented or super fixated on closing the sale, right? Those are not negotiators. Those are not negotiators because really effective negotiating pulls in very disparate ideas from a wide variety of sources in order to identify solutions that are going to be the most effective for both parties and that are going to generate the greatest amount of value.
Okay. Yeah. So as we kind of close up this section, I want people to really understand what an interesting combination of skill sets are required to have a very top-notch quality negotiator at your table. And then secondly, I want people to remember that's someone who you need at your table. So in a few minutes here, we're going to take a short break, and then we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics in all of business, which is David versus Goliath. You're listening to the Exitology Unlock Your Profits, Unlock Your Potential show on International Business Growth Radio.